What's going on, everybody? Welcome into the Better Fantasy Football Show. I'm your host, Will Ty, and I am so excited. I'm really, truly excited to be joined today by Billy Muzio, FF Muzio on Twitter. I mean, you can find him everywhere. You can find him on the high-stakes fantasy sites. You can find him on Player Profiler. Billy, it's a pleasure to have you on, man. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, Will, appreciate the invite. Really enjoyed getting to know you better this past FSGA meeting when we were in Cleveland. We had a little nice poker outing late at night, drank a few cocktails, had fun walking through the city and drinking. So it's nice to sit down and talk some football with you.
It was more fun for you than it was for me. I got cleaned out in one hand pretty good.
Yeah, I ended up doubling up in like an hour. I got out of there pretty quickly, but overall it was fun. Coop actually won, I think, the most out of all of us, but it ended up being a fun night.
After his little fiasco, but we won't get into all that. The Coop
A
fiasco.
Yeah. But
yeah, well, dude, this is great because we have you here to talk 49ers, and as everybody can see in Billy's background, there are a couple pretty high-profiler 49er players there. Billy, did you grow up a 49ers fan? You grew up in the Bay Area?
I grew up in Northern California. I grew up actually liking two teams. As a kid, you don't know rivalries like you do as an adult. The two teams that I actually liked the most were the San Francisco 49ers and the Green Bay Packers, who, of course, had some big rivalries throughout those years of the Steve Young era and Brett Favre times. But loved the Packers growing up because my grandfather or great grandfather played for them when they were called the Green Bay Meat Packers back when they had leather heads, and so there's just a special place in my heart for Green Bay. But my team, as an adult, of course, is San Francisco 49ers.
Bleeding red, not bleeding green.
Bleeding red. Yes, okay, exactly.
Cool. Good stuff.
The only cheese in this house is the stuff I'm eating.
I love it. Okay, well, hey, dude, I think we should really get into the numbers here and really get into the data, get our hands dirty, because Player Profiler is, I would say, the number one place to go for these kind of analytics. Like what you guys are doing and putting out on a free basis is pretty remarkable. Like you guys are putting out advanced metrics for the people that anybody can reference at any point in time. So if you could really quickly just tell me and the audience kind of what Player Profiler is, what it adds to the fantasy players repertoire, just give us a little taste of that.
Yeah, we are a entertainment company first and foremost. So our goal is to entertain any sports fans or people who are just into fantasy sports and football in particular. But as you mentioned, we have a bunch of free player pages, and on those player pages, it has a ton of data analytics. So we're putting out there like opportunity share, productivity, advanced receiving stats and metrics, advanced efficiency reports, and efficiency metrics, and then formation-specific information. So all of this is available free to the public, player by player, page by page. We're going to be having team by team here shortly. It's going to have a breakdown of all that stuff. And then, of course, we have athleticism scores for each player. It has all their workout metrics on the site for college, their college target shares and their college production, and then everything they did inside of the combine, and then, of course, like their height and their draft and everything. So any information that you could usually utilize in order to, one, either maybe make projections or do more research, a lot of it is available for free over at our site at Player Profiler.
It really is remarkable, like what you guys do. And if you're listening to this right now and you're serious about fantasy football, you want to get better, you want to understand, you want to play at a pretty deep level, you got to just do it right now. Pause the video or keep listening. Go to playerprofiler.com, go check it out, and you'll see for yourself what we're talking about here. But without further ado, let's get into it, Billy. We have you on to talk about the 49ers, and this is, of course, a continuation of our series where we're previewing each of the NFL teams and all of the fantasy relevant players for that team, so that way everybody can go into the season with a good understanding of the players and kind of have a good understanding of their value and how we assess that. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and bring up each player on the 49ers, and we're going to ask Billy if he's drafting or passing on them at their current ADP. Sound good, Billy?
Sounds great. Let's rock and
roll.
All right,
let's do it. So let's start at the top, hot and heavy, with Christian McCaffrey, currently going in the top 5. I know this is a little bit arbitrary to say, like, oh, should you draft Christian McCaffrey in round 1? Like, obviously you should draft Christian McCaffrey in round 1. It comes down to where. So could you give me a little bit of an idea, Billy, of if you're drafting him or passing on him at the 101 this year?
Yeah, I think when you talk about roster construction and more particularly player selection, I think it's important to keep in mind the amount of fantasy drafts that you are doing, right? If you're doing 1, 2, or 3 fantasy drafts, I would say that, and depending upon the format that you're in as well and the roster requirements, more than likely I'd be passing on Christian McCaffrey in the 1 hole. Now, if it's a start 3 running back league and we're getting, points per carry, then yeah, he comes into consideration there at the 101. But I am more comfortable taking Christian McCaffrey at the 103 to 105 mark. He is my RB1 this season, but I just prefer to take, a Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase there at the 101 and taking that true elite wide receiver. And Christian McCaffrey definitely is, one of the most, if not the most elite running backs in the game right now with his dual versatility in the passing game and his rushing upside in this potent 49er offense. That being said, there's a lot of running backs that you can get late this year in drafts, in particularly in rounds like 4 through 7, which we've seen as kind of the dead zone in the years past. But there's a lot of production and potential, workhorses that are going in these rounds that I would typically, push the position now and take this time of year during that time. So I will take Christian McCaffrey. If I'm doing 1 or 2 leagues, I'm probably passing on him. But with the volume that I do, you're mixing him in pretty regularly.
Could you give us a little bit of an idea, just one name who you're targeting in that what used to be an RB dead zone? Give us one name that you leave the draft and you're like, I'm so happy I just got player X in round 6.
Yeah, so there's a couple that I really like this year. I mean, Cam Akers right now is being underdrafted in my opinion. This backfield he has all to himself. There's really nobody worth mentioning outside of Evans, and then they have Kyron Williams, but it's pretty gross outside of Cam Akers. And they don't have a lot of offensive weapons in the passing game this year either. I mean, Cooper Kupp is of course number 1. He's already dealing with a hamstring injury, but outside that, they really only have Van Jefferson, who's the number 2 right now, arguably maybe with Tyler Higbee, the tight end, who's competing for that number 2 role. And then it kind of drops off pretty significantly from there. You got Tutu Atwell, you got Skowronek, you got Puka Nacua. So there's a lot of options and ways that Cam Akers can succeed in this offense, especially if he sees more in the passing work. But I mean, he's a pretty much lock for 50+% of the workload in the rushing share department. And so love where he's going in drafts. The other one I really like this year as well is James Conner. Again, in a similar situation where there's just not a lot of mouths to feed in this offense. They just traded away DeAndre Hopkins, and it opened up, roughly 23% of the target share to pick up for the rest of the team. There's really only Keontae Ingram behind him, and as long as he can stay healthy and on the field, they're probably going to lean on him because as of next year, they have an out in his contract, and this could be a potential situation we saw last year where we saw Josh Jacobs kind of explode. Contract year, they're kind of working him into the ground. They have no ties to him the following year. They don't really care if he gets injured or hurt because they can just get out of the contract, and there's a lot of uncertainty at the other position. So I could see a similar production for James Conner where he's seeing maybe a career high in touches just because of the need for him in this backfield. And we know we have Kyler Murray, who's going to be coming off of injury and probably less likely to run as well.
That was awesome, and thank you for that quick indulgence on the dead zone running backs. I mean, dude, that's the number 1 way to win this year. It feels like if you can hit on some of those guys in the mid rounds at the running back position, you can afford yourself the ability to take wide receiver, tight end, or quarterback early. That's a good recipe for success. So let's move on from the running back position to the wide receivers. Obviously, Deebo Samuel kind of exploded onto the scene a couple years ago with that breakout year. Kind of an outlier, probably. I think we would all say, just given what was going on in the running back room at the time, he had to take a lot of the carries for the team. Maybe you'll disagree, Billy. I don't know. But Deebo Samuel in round 3, are you drafting or are you passing on him this year?
Round 3, I'm passing. I get him quite a bit in round 4, at least at FFPC drafts. I like him in that range. 2021, as you mentioned, kind of anomaly, finished as the wide receiver number 3 in fantasy points per game at 21.2. Last year came in as wide receiver 28 in fantasy points per game. I don't expect to see that amount of rushing volume. We know that it was a talking point in his contract when he re-signed with the Niners, and he kind of voiced his displeasure. Last year, though, I do believe he was out of shape. He didn't look the same. He's even said that he was out of shape, and it affected his production. And so we didn't quite see see the same explosiveness from him that we had seen in the previous year. There was also the contract dispute, which caused a lot of distraction, and he admitted to that as well. And so excited to see what they're able to do this year with everyone back, no contract disputes, everybody's rocking and rolling, and they're ready to kind of hit the field running. He did lead the league in efficiency and juke rate last year at 35.7%. We all know he's a human joystick and capable of taking it to the house on any given play. I just want to see his target share kind of increase and then get him the ball more in the passing game. We know what he can do on the ground when he given the ball, but we also know that it can cause concern for injury. So if he can see a few more targets in the passing game, run more routes, because he was like wide receiver 65 last year in routes ran at 337. So I want to see him run more routes, and I want to see him have more route participation. But round 4, I'm pulling the trigger.
I love it. And off the cuff, if you don't have it, no worries. But what are you guys projecting for him in terms of rushing volume this year? How many touches?
So in terms of the rushing volume for Deebo Samuel, I have him projected for roughly 8% of the rushing share, which is roughly 38 rushing attempts.
Okay.
So it's significant for a receiver by all means, not for a running back, but we know he is the receiver. I do believe they want to kind of not necessarily fade him out in that category, but just use him less and preserve his health. And so we did give him a slight uptick in target share. He comes in inside my projections and my rankings as wide receiver 20 on the dot. And so that's, I think, well within the reach for him and his output and his ceiling.
Okay, cool. And appreciate that quick reference there. Moving on to his running mate, his longtime teammate, George Kittle, going off the board in round 4. How do you feel about George Kittle there? Are you drafting or are you passing on George Kittle in round 4 this year?
I like George Kittle a lot. I think last year his 11 touchdowns is probably going to be one of his career highs. He had a stretch there that was just unbelievable. When you look at it's like the final weeks 15, 16, 17, and 18. He had 2 touchdowns a game, except for week 17, he only had 1. So he had 7 touchdowns in that 4-week span. Pretty unsustainable, but nonetheless, it just shows you the chemistry that he had with Brock Purdy. Brock Purdy is ahead of schedule right now. We know that he is looking to start week 1. I was a fan of Brock Purdy during that stretch last year. I said on Twitter on January 1st that, mark my words, he'd be the starter if he's healthy enough to start. Looking like that call is going to be accurate. We all know that Kittle is probably the best all-around tight end in the league. When I say all-around, I'm talking blocking and receiving. That's why his consistent, or his usage in the passing game is pretty inconsistent, because he's always on the field, but he's blocking a lot as well. And so I think that he is still going to be a top 5, top 6 tight end. Especially if Purdy's on the field, because we saw that chemistry. I just think that we're going to see some regression in the touchdown department. I want to see a little bit more inside the passing game. I want to see more targets. I want to see more receptions. If we can kind of balance those two, I think he's in line for another big year. But I don't think he's going to finish as, like last year, he was number 2 in fantasy points per game at 13.4. I don't think we'll see that again.
Yeah, so we're passing on him in round 4 then?
I mean, I'm still drafting him. If I'm doing one draft, I'm passing on him. If I'm, mixing in volume, you have to add him into the mix.
For sure, yeah. George Kittle is one of those players, and you alluded to it earlier, dude, where him being such a good blocker is almost a detriment to his fantasy value, because you never know. Right. Coach Shanny could just scheme it up in a certain week where he's like, okay, George, you're running 10 routes today, and you're going to block, man, because we need to clear up that outside edge, and you're great at it. And so it's one of those things where it just sucks. And I guess let me ask you this, Billy. Are you able to sort of predict that at all when you look at the opponent that he's playing? So on a week-to-week basis, you can say, oh, they're playing the Broncos. The Broncos do X, Y, and Z well. They do A, B, and C poorly. I can play George Kittle this week because I don't think he's going to block as much. Like, are you able to do that or not really?
Tight end position is, last year in particular, was one of the toughest to project on a week-to-week basis. When you looked at like the Fantasy Pros weekly results, I was like top 10 in quarterbacks, top 5 in running backs, and top 10 in receivers. And then I was like 62nd in tight ends. It was so hard to predict last year and project on a week-to-week basis. That being said, we can typically project when tight ends are going to do well versus a team, and you nailed it. It's a tight end that's given up 4 touchdowns in the last 2 weeks, or they've given up 80 yards to tight ends the previous 4 weeks, right? And so we can if we have enough data to support the model, we can plug that data in and project tight ends pretty well. It's the touchdown category that is hard to project, and it's one of those things that you can't chase when you do projections, and it's hard to account for. It's a huge variable, and so when you see stretches like he had, that 7 touchdowns in 4 weeks, you cannot project that or predict that. So I think it's safe to project him 4, 5, 6 touchdowns, but 11 like he had last year, kind of out of the norm and not something we can project for.
Yeah, not to go too deep on the tight end stuff, but that's exactly the point. It's like when these guys are sort of being separated by 30 yards or 35 yards on the low end and then 50 yards on a medium end. When you add a 6-point touchdown into the mix, that's just such a variance and you can't predict you can kind of predict touchdowns, but you can't predict touchdowns, so it's tough.
No, if you look at down the stretch, it was Detroit Lions. They had a different tight end catching a touchdown every single week. Mm-hmm. If you took those tight ends in that run, those 3 tight ends that were consistently scoring, they were up there with Travis Kelce in fantasy points. But it was so random. You couldn't pick one. It was like one week he's tight in 1, and the next week he's tight in 50, and then somebody else on the Lions was tight in 5, and then the following week he's tight in 48, right? And so it's the touchdown variance is impossible, but if you can hit it, that's the thing was especially in these ranking contests is that you will see is a tight end will go 1 catch or 2 catches for 12 yards and a touchdown, and he's a top 10 tight end for the week because of the touchdown. It's so hard to predict.
Yeah. And all right, last tight end question. I could dive down the rabbit hole with you for hours, man. Last tight end question. And I don't want to ask it as much from the perspective of you putting together a portfolio of teams, because I understand that when you're playing in these high stakes contests, you want a portfolio of teams, right? You don't want to just overload on one thing or the other. But for people playing in their home league, right? They're listening to this in August and they're getting ready for their drafts with their buddies. Would you advise going and grabbing one of those elite tight ends early to give you that positional advantage, or are you typically somebody that would say, wait on tight end this year, go get one of these guys in the 10th round that we like and see how it works out?
So my strategy at tight end is a punt the position and find value. Every year I believe that we can find a tight end that is being drafted outside the top 12 that'll finish inside the top 12. And you can even say a tight end being drafted outside the top 15 and going inside the top 5. We've seen Logan Thomas do it. We've seen Evan Ingram do it. We saw Darren Waller do it. So there's every single year an individual who will ascend into the tight end rankings and become a value in these drafts. And so I'm a firm believer on just punting. Unless you're in tight end premium, then you kind of have to push the position up. But if you're in a home league and there's no tight end premium, then people that I like to target right now are like Greg Dulcich, who's now he's climbing because of the Patrick injury and the Hamler heart condition, and so now there's a consolidated target tree, and so he's climbing he's climbing the boards inside draft rooms. But there's still tight ends out there that are going cheap, like Gerald Everett on the Chargers, who saw 80 plus targets last year and is probably going to see 80 plus this year as well. There's tight ends like Trey McBride who are going outside the top 20 at the position and is arguably the number 2 or 3 option any given week in the passing game now that DeAndre Hopkins is no longer there. There's Sam Laporta, similar situation, right? Rookie tight end entering into the league, but Jameson Williams is suspended the first 6 weeks, so he has a chance to carve out a role early inside the season. There's tight ends like Dalton Kincaid, who's been climbing, at least in the high stakes board, climbing pretty quickly because of the camp news, but in home leagues probably going to be drafted outside the top 15 or 12th the position and has an option and has a possibility of finishing inside the top 10 simply because of the explosiveness of this offense and them really kind of lacking a true wide receiver 2 on this team. And so there's players like Irv Smith, right, in Cincinnati, who has all the talent in the world but has not been able to stay healthy. And if he can stay healthy in this offense, this explosive offense, where he's not going to see any type of double coverage, he's going to see a lot of single coverage and probably have a lot of the short underneath and middle of the field cleared out for him with all the other weapons that they have. There's so many options here at tight end this year. I typically punt the position now and just attack value.
All right, well, that was Will and Bill's tight end hour. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. No, that was, dude, that was awesome, man. Thank you for that. I could go on for tight ends about forever because it feels like the inflection point for teams. Like when you look at a team and they have a great tight end, it automatically just vaults the entire team up in your opinion. And then if they don't have a good tight end, it's tough. But so I like the advice there. Punt on tight end, get value late because it happens every year. Okay, so let's move on to the last member of this receiving group for the 49ers that is going to get some run. He's getting talked about an awful lot. He's one of these players that has immense talent. I think everybody can agree with that, and that's just been a question of opportunity for him. It's Brandon Aiyuk. So are you drafting or are you passing on Brandon Aiyuk here in round 6, Billy?
I like Brandon Aiyuk a lot. He had a very quiet 1,000-yard season last year. Like, no one's even really talking about it. He had just over 1,015 yards, 113 targets last year. Very sneaky in fantasy points per game last year. Came in as wide receiver 23 in fantasy points per game. Had a massive route participation, 94.7% of routes on this offense. So I like his opportunity. He finally got a little bit more target share last year at 23.5%. Came in as wide receiver 23 in that category. 8 touchdowns, which was number 11 for receivers. And so his opportunity started getting better. He still had a lot of drops. I think he's got to fix the drops. He had 8 drops last year. But when he's on the field, he's efficient. He's getting separation. He averaged 2.3 yards per pass attempt in his direction, which was, wide receiver number 3 in the league, which was really impressive. And so I like Brandon Aiyuk. I like his opportunity. I think he's going to continue to see more. I am drafting him in round 6 in drafts.
Yeah, if he had one more touchdown, so if he ended the year with 9, he'd be ranked as tied for 4th among wide receivers in touchdowns. So he's 1 or 2, and he dropped a couple end zone looks, I think, if I remember correctly. So he
dropped a pretty bad one. It was actually Brock Purdy's best throw of the year. He had a little scramble where he switched from left side of the field back. He reverse rolled out and dodged 3 tackles and then threw this ball in the corner and hit Brandon Aiyuk right in the hands and he dropped it. I was so sad for Purdy. It was such a beautiful throw.
Yeah, be sad for me. I was the one with Brandon Aiyuk on my fantasy team, man. Come on, that was more painful for me than Brock Purdy.
That was like a 30-yard catch and touchdown. You would have had almost 10 points there.
But yeah, that's the thing, man. I mean, if he could figure out and maybe that's why the 49ers haven't trusted him as much so far in his career. I can see that he's an elite separator. If I can see it, the 49ers know it. So, but maybe they're just ahead of the curve where they're like, look, this guy can't be relied on to catch the freaking ball, so we're not going to involve him as much. So maybe that's the issue with Aiyuk. I don't know.
Yeah, 2021 didn't have as many drops, but didn't have as much opportunity either. So it's all relative.
Right. Okay. Well, we're all excited about Brandon Aiyuk. Let's move on to somebody who we aren't as excited about this year as we were last year, Elijah Mitchell. And I know now there's a development. I think he had a thigh strain, you were saying, Billy, before we started recording. So round 10 ADP is likely to come down a little bit. So just give me your take on Elijah Mitchell this year. Both one in the context of if Christian McCaffrey is able to stay healthy all year, what kind of work do you project him to get? And then if Christian McCaffrey goes down, God forbid, let's say something happens, where would Elijah Mitchell go in your rankings?
So this is interesting, and I've had this discussion with a lot of people in regards to Elijah Mitchell because I like Elijah Mitchell as a talent, and I believe his contingent value is probably one of the highest in the league when you look at handcuff running backs. That being said, whenever we evaluate contingent value and the potential output that this running back may have in case of injury with the number 1, and in this scenario, Christian McCaffrey, we also have to look at that individual and what kind of workload he's able to maintain. And Elijah Mitchell in particular, possibly one of the best handcuffs in the league. That being said, he could also get the starting running back role and lose it in the same week because he has not been the model of health and consistency. We just mentioned, 2 minutes ago that he's already has another injury. He's had an injury every single year that he's been on the field. And so we have to be concerned about his durability. His rookie campaign, he only played 11 games. Last year, he only played 5 games. And so my belief is the contingent value and cost basis of Elijah Mitchell in drafts is too expensive because if he is given the full workload, he's probably going to break down. And then we're probably going to see a mixture of Tyrion Davis-Price or Jordan Mason in the mix as well. So I'm a little bit lower than consensus on Elijah Mitchell. I'm not drafting him inside the 10th round. I typically pass on him here, and this is where I'm usually attacking tight end or even quarterback. And I would say pass on Elijah Mitchell because even in the case of an injury of Christian McCaffrey, we're most likely going to see some rotation at the position and probably even a little bit more Deebo Samuel.
Yeah, I think too. If McCaffrey goes down, they'll probably bring in somebody.
It could very well.
Let's say, yeah, let's just say that Zeke Elliott doesn't go sign, and then some like they'll probably bring someone in, depending on the severity of this hypothetical Christian McCaffrey injury, which we hope never happens because we love watching Christian McCaffrey play football. Okay, so moving on to the quarterbacks, I know obviously a lot of controversy in this quarterback room for the San Francisco 49ers. If they could have figured this position out, dude, like 3 years ago, they probably would have won 3 Super Bowls. But let's talk about Brock Purdy, because right now he's going undrafted. He's projected to be the starter. How are you feeling about Brock Purdy in this offense? Are you taking a late round flyer on him? And is there any potential chance that one of the other two guys could come in and take the job from him?
I like Brock Purdy. I think he's the
You
starter.
like every 49er, man.
I do, but I like Brock Purdy, especially out of this quarterback mix. Like, to me, it's pretty clearly Brock Purdy. I know people will argue for Trey Lance and the draft capital and his upside, his arm strength, and his versatility on the ground, but if you watch film and you watch these games, you can clearly see that Trey Lance was not comfortable in this offense, and he did not run the West Coast offense well, where Purdy kind of came in and immediately the offense just clicked for him. And the West Coast offense is about quick releases and getting people the ball, your playmakers the ball, so they can make plays downfield. That's why Deebo Samuel does so well in this system. That's why Christian McCaffrey is going to do well in this system like he did last year. That's why George Kittle always has, good years and a lot of yards after the catch. And so Brock Purdy did exactly what was needed from a quarterback in this system, and it's just get people the ball. We saw Purdy even work through his third, sometimes fourth progression during plays, which was pretty impressive as a rookie. I know he doesn't have the arm strength. He doesn't have the ability to just tuck and run like Trey Lance. But from poise and from maturity level, Brock Purdy showed to me that he was a NFL caliber quarterback and consistently just praised his teammates for their efforts. And when they failed, he criticized himself. Very opposite of a lot of rookie quarterbacks and very opposite of even a lot of veterans who typically will point the blame somewhere else or say that they did everything in their power. And so I was really impressed with Brock Purdy more as a person than a player and how he gained the confidence of this team and won over the locker room. And I think it would be pretty hard for the Niners to pass on him if he's healthy enough to play.
Gotcha. So in your dynasty leagues, go get Brock Purdy if you can. Go trade for him.
The cost is going up. Cost is going up.
Is.
And when you look at his efficiency, and these are some cherry-picked numbers, but I'm going to go over them anyways. And we look, because he didn't really qualify if you look at just his overall pass attempts. But if you round it out to 350 snaps, right, because he didn't play the entire season. So 350 snaps, he actually led the league versus all quarterbacks in touchdown rate, 7.6%. Patrick Mahomes, for instance, 6.3%. Josh Allen, 6.1%. Joe Burrow, 5.9%. So very elite level. Yes, we're due for regression, but just shows you what type of year he had last year. He was also very impressive under pressure in the red zone, where he finished number 2 in pressure completion percentage at 55.8%. The only person to finish ahead of him inside this category is Justin Herbert, who is 57.1%. And then we look at true passer rating, which is one of the best metrics for a quarterback, in my opinion. He finished number 7, which was 94.81%, just further kind of cementing his status as one of the most reliable and efficient quarterbacks. Again, yes, I do bleed red and gold. That being said, the metrics back up what I saw on camera, and we can take those two things, analytics and film, and put them together and they match. It's always a good sign.
Yeah, that's all systems go when that happens. And that's what I love about player profiling and what you guys are doing is you're bringing those numbers to the table, because football is an emotional sport. It's an emotional thing to watch. And so even if you're watching the film, it's tough to sometimes separate yourself from pre-existing notions you have or different things like that. And so when you can see something on film and then have it backed up with data, that's huge. And so you guys are doing a great job with that. So Sam Darnold, Trey Lance, probably not going to get into the mix. What do you think about Trey Lance if he goes somewhere else? Like, let's just say he goes to the Raiders or something like that. Like, what would you be thinking about Trey Lance if he goes to another team? Traded, during training camp or something like that. What are you thinking about him in terms of a couple years from now, not necessarily like this year?
It'd be good for his dynasty value. I just don't think he's a good fit for the Niners system. I truly think that they were going to draft Mac Jones, and they got kind of they chickened out when the media kind
Yeah.
of put heat on him. That being said, I think Trey Lance is athletic. I think he has the arm strength to succeed. I just don't think it's in this offense. And if he does get traded, great for him. I think he has a chance to kind of rebuild his career. It would help his dynasty value. He's still back in quarterback 2 for me, even if he is a starting quarterback, for call it the Raiders, call it Tennessee, call it any team you'd really want that is in need of a quarterback. He's not going to have the weapons that he has in SF, and so he's going to have to rely more on his accuracy, which, like I said, his poise just didn't look quite right to me on film and didn't look comfortable running an NFL caliber offense right now. And so it might take time and repetition like it does with most rookies, but I just am not sold on Trey Lance as a prospect. I thought he was pretty raw coming out of college, and just it's kind of showing now in the NFL as well.
What was your reaction on draft day when they were not? Because I know we had the news leading up that they were going to take Trey Lance, but like, what was going through your head at that time?
I was pissed they made the trade to begin with, just because I thought there was a chance that you could have got Mac Jones there. I think the original pick was either 12 or 13. I forget where they were, but there was a chance that you could have gotten him there. I didn't like they traded up so early, and then now they are waiting on the first 2 teams to see who they get. If you look at it, I think Fields went like a pick or 2 ahead of where they went, so they didn't have to give up near as much draft capital, and they probably could have given up like 1 first to just move up and gotten Fields at their original spot pretty much, because he fell in that draft to the Bears. And I think that there's so many different outcomes that could have happened. It makes it all the better that Purdy hit, because it's now you at least have a quarterback that you can rely on. But still very frustrating as a fan to look at and see the draft capital that you gave up, and what, like the Dolphins, for instance, what they got in return for that draft is just massive. And it's, in my opinion, probably one of the best trades in the NFL history, what the Dolphins got in terms of like assets in return from that trade.
100%. All right, so last licks on the 49ers. Anybody else that we didn't talk about that we need to be talking about right now, Billy?
I think Tyrion Davis-Price is interesting. It's like a running back flyer, especially in deeper leagues. I'm a believer in just kind of painting the draft board, green or whatever color your running back is in your draft, and taking up, just flyers, because if these guys hits, it's lightning in a bottle. If they don't, you just drop and pick someone else up, right? So you're talking like round 19, round 20 in drafts, last couple of rounds, taking those flyers on positions. And Tyrion Davis-Price, again, we talk about contingent value. Christian McCaffrey goes down, Tyrion Davis-Price could find himself in a larger workload than people are expecting. So that's someone else that I'd mention here inside this running back core, at least.
Awesome, man. Okay, well, last question, because we got to run. I know you're a busy guy, and so I appreciate you going over time here. We're already at the 33-minute mark somehow. But last question, Billy. If you're going to give one piece of advice to somebody who's going into their home league, right? We're here in August. It's August 3rd. They're getting ready for their drafts. Their draft is in late August. They call up Billy Muzio and they say, Billy, I need one piece of advice. Give me one piece of advice as I walk into my fantasy draft. What is it?
One piece of advice for drafters, I would say, is to take risks, especially in tournaments, and even in your home league, right? So what does that mean? It's going to be shooting for upside, right? No one remembers who got second place. No one remembers who has third place, right? It's the Ricky Bobby model. If you ain't first, you're last. and so always shoot for upside, never lay up. Right, and I'm going for high upside players. Right, you're looking at players that have massive workload. You're looking at players that have massive target share. A lot of these players are in year 2 in the wide receiver position. Right, you look at players like Treylon Burks, who's still going to see over 20% of the target share. Players like Jahan Dotson, who's going to see over 20% of the target share. So players that are going to have a significant role, shoot for that upside, and don't be afraid to take risks.
I love it. Well, this has been great, Billy. Before we go, tell everybody where they can find you on the internet.
Yep, you can find me on Twitter at FFMuzio. That's Muzio. All my rankings projections are the ones that power the site over at Player Profiler. And then, of course, most of my rankings will also be at Fantasy Pros inside of the Fantasy Pros Expert Ranking Competition.
Awesome. You're the man, Billy. Thank you so much for coming on, dude. This has been awesome.
Thanks for having me on, Will.